Hey everybody, welcome back to my channel. My name is Stephanie Bree, and today I'm talking about the Generation 2 of Transformers. So, Transformers Generation 2 is convoluted and messy depending on where you grew up. If you lived in Japan between 1988 and 1995, you have a very different understanding of what Generation 2 is than you would if you were an American during that same time. Because Generation 1, as fans have retroactively renamed the first decade of Transformers, never stopped in Japan. And likewise, it never stopped in Europe either. Now, technically, it didn't stop in the US. It took a hiatus. What that means is, so before I get into Generation 2, I got to give a little backstory, a couple minutes at most. I'll try to keep it quick. Transformers as a property does not exist. It is an amalgamation of multiple independent, unrelated toy lines brought together under a single marketing banner. So you have some Diaclone toys, some Microman toys, and a handful of toys from other toy lines like Robotech and a few others. So after a while, those toys were produced in Japan by a company called Takara, today Tommy Takara, and in the US and Europe, they were repackaged and marketed by a company called Hasbro. Okay, so that's enough of the backstory. Starting in 1986 with Transformers the movie, Hasbro wanted to create their own Transformers toys. Which, if you look at the toys Hasbro made compared to the toys Takara made, there is a split. And it is usually that divide where a lot of Transformers fans fall. Pre-movie fans and post-movie fans. Pre-movie fans washed their hands, sold off or got rid of their Transformers, and migrated to Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles or Thundercats or whatever, and walked away. Post-movie fans dwindled. There was a divide. Not like a split like I just mentioned, but there was a diversion. There were multiple paths. You had Headmasters, Target Masters, Pretenders, Micro Masters, Action Masters. And then you still had, amongst all that, more or less traditional Transformers. So it was a lot of different subsets of Transformers. And what this did was fans of the Target Masters or the Power Masters would buy those toys, but not touch the Micro Masters, Action Masters, etc. Fans of the cars and trucks and planes and trains and stuff, the Takara stuff, were finding less and less product interesting to them. So they were walking away. And what Hasbro was noticing is because the movie really pissed off the fan base by killing Optimus Prime, what they did was they retconned that as fast as they could and brought Optimus Prime back, but the toy they released to bring him back was decidedly subpar compared to the toy that existed before. And kids were over it. So what happened here was Hasbro, Marvel, Sunbow decided to sever ties, and they canceled the Transformers cartoon. And Marvel Publications, if you will, decided to continue the comic book for a few more years, and then they wrapped it up and walked away. They severed ties with Hasbro. Now, this gets us caught up to 1990. This was the last year Hasbro marketed and sold Transformers in the US before the rebrand. So there was 91, 92, and then they relaunched. They had a like a kind of like wave 1 was late 92, and then they went full hog in 1993, and then they continued into 94, and then they walked away in 95. They regrouped and reorganized, and that's when they came up with the Beast Wars, which launched in 1996. So Generation 2 was 93, 94, and 95 in the US. However, okay, this is where it's tricky. They didn't stop G1 in Japan or Europe. So when the Generation 2 toys came out in the US, in the US, Generation 2 was called that for two reasons. One, well, because of the strategy. The strategy was twofold. One, they were reissuing but also retooling classic or original G1 toys. So what they did was took the original mold and made slight modifications to it by giving it enhanced accessories. So like the actual toy, the transformation, etc., was identical to the G1 toy, but it would come with like optional electronic components and redesigned weapons for the most part. Or in the case of the mini bots, they were just recolors. So like Beachcomber was blue in G1. He was blue in G1. He was a shiny metallic green in G2. Bumblebee was yellow in G1. He was metallic gold in Generation 2, etc. They recolored and reissued a handful of about 30 or less G1 toys. Side by side that, Hasbro also working with Takara imported the toys that they were selling as Generation 1 toys. So the ones that they were still selling that America had stopped selling. So they were bringing those over. And then there were some new toys that were created for the North American market that were re-exported to Japan or Europe. So when that happened, those other two regions rebranded their current line into Generation 2. I know I said it was convoluted. So then those regions started producing original Generation 2 toys that were exclusive to their respective market. So Japan had G2 toys that were sold only in Japan. Europe had G2 toys that were sold only in Europe. And then America just got like the worst of it. We didn't get the good toys. Now the second, it was three-pronged, just like G1. toy line, cartoon, comic book. But here's the thing. We got a brand new 6-issue miniseries comic book. But all we got for the cartoon was a weird amalgamation of the G1 cartoon with some CGI enhanced transitions, which was very frustrating to watch. But they only did it to episodes that featured toys that existed in the Generation 2 toy line. So if they weren't selling Omega Supreme, then they weren't going to repackage episodes that focused on Omega Supreme. What they were going to do is focus on the characters they were selling. Now, there was some wiggle room because Optimus Prime and Bumblebee are in nearly every episode of Season 1 and Season 2. So most, but not all, of Season 1 and Season 2, well, all of Season 1 was given the G2 treatment, and most of Season 2, but not all, was given the G2 treatment. But only 7 or 8 episodes from Season 3 were given the G2 treatment, partially because the movie never was, which meant because the movie toys, Hot Rod, Cup, Blur, etc., were not reissued at all. Not one of them were reissued. So they didn't exist in the G2 continuity, so there was no reason to invest in repackaging those episodes. However, kids saw through this. The toys are not great. I'm going to be honest, I love Generation 2. I have nostalgia for Generation 2. I own a significant number of Generation 2 toys, and my focus currently as a collector is on buying more G2 toys, specifically the ones I had as a kid or remember seeing on the toy shelves. Whether they were featured in the cartoon or not is irrelevant. And then the comic book was only 6 issues, and it got its relaunch out of an issue of G.I. Joe. So you had to be reading G.I. Joe to know what the hell was going on. The only good thing I'll say about the G2 comic book, is it was written by Simon Furman, who was, some would argue, the better writer during the G1 run. But I think that's belittling Bob Budiansky, because he did a lot of good stuff, too. Those early episodes with Ratchet are fucking awesome. I don't care what anybody says. So, issues, Why do I keep saying episodes? God damn it. Anyways. So the toys came in 2 forms. You had original toys and repackaged G1 toys that were repainted. I've already talked about this. But the G2 toys were just as gimmicky as the late G1 toys. So we had color changers and rotor force and laser rods and laser cycles and heroes and GoBots. Yes, I said Transformers GoBots. I know I said it was convoluted. I'm telling you. So let's take a detour or a side quest to talk briefly about Transformers GoBots. Here's all you need to know. Tonka, who imported Machine Robo into the U.S. and marketed them under the GoBots branding, went out of business, got bought by Hasbro. Hasbro discovered they had the trademark to the GoBots characters and names, so they wanted to use that to keep the trademark valid. So they created a line of Hot Wheels style transforming cars and just called them GoBots. Now those same GoBots cars, air quotes, were reissued multiple times in the next decade, from 2001 to about 2006 ish. There they were referred to as spy changers. Okay, I know. I said it was convoluted. I'm sorry. Now, it gets worse. I apologize for that. I had to throw up and I was trying to pause the video before I got there. Oh, I'm so sorry. Okay, so back to the video. Things get complicated because Generation 2 introduced ball and socket joint transformers. This would later evolve over the years, but G2 was the first time that articulation as action figures in robot mode was given a priority. Now, previously, the closest we had seen to this was the Action Masters, which were not well received. I've already done a video on that. So, what this meant was kids were responding favorably to the new G2 toys, but not in the big numbers Hasbro needed them to. Fans of G1 were interested only in the reissues because they were kind of cool. You had Optimus Prime with the black trailer and a different color paint job slightly, and bigger spring-loaded firing missile weapons. And so that did appeal to a subset of the collector base. But most of the collectors had already moved on. So they were trying to go after the young kids. And young kids were not watching that G2 cartoon because it sucked. It gave you a headache or even a seizure if you weren't careful. It was not a good show. So it was not well received. The comic book, likewise, was not well received, did not sell well, and was promptly canceled. Like I said, by 1993, Transformers had been replaced in the marketplace by two toy lines, Ninja Turtles and Power Rangers. Power Rangers filled that itch a kid had that a Transformer previously would have filled. So the young kids who should have been buying Generation 2 toys weren't. They were buying Power Rangers instead. So what Hasbro did was they transferred the Transformers intellectual property to Kenner, a company they had recently acquired, and Kenner launched Beast Wars in 1996. They had a cartoon which was computer animated at the time, which was very expensive to produce, but very groundbreaking when they released it. It hadn't been done on that big of a scale before too much. The only other big, I don't want to say big budget, but big, like, ratings-wise, CGI sci-fi action cartoon that came out around the same time, a couple, 2 or 3 years before Beast Wars, was Reboot. Now, the only reason why I'm talking about Beast Wars is not because that's what replaced G2, but because it's relevant. And the reason it's relevant is Generation 2 didn't just end suddenly the same as G1 didn't end suddenly. It was a gradual progression. So they were still selling G2 toys in 1996 when they were also trying to get you to buy Beast Wars toys. Now, more so in Japan, where G2 was a little bit more successful in that people never stopped buying Transformers toys, but the G2 specific branding wasn't why. In Europe, I don't even know if they got G2, to be honest. I'm not 100%. But what we got G2 related out of Beast Wars was the KB Toy Store exclusive Machine Wars, which was released in 1997. Now, the reason why Machine Wars relates back to G2 and why I had to talk about Beast Wars, notice the similarities in names, is because Hasbro wasn't done selling Generation 2 toys. They had unsold product that hadn't been released yet that they didn't want to release under the G2 banner because they wrote that off as an unsuccessful property. So they tried to launch Machine Wars as basically the leftovers that never got released under Generation 2. So they're Generation 2 toys that would have been sold in G2 packaging had the line continued, but weren't. So the Machine Wars toys were only called Machine Wars because they thought kids would go to the toy store and see Beast Wars, which they were watching on Saturday morning cartoon, and think, ooh, I want Beast Wars. And then sitting next to Beast Wars, they would see Machine Wars and buy some of those too. That's what Hasbro hoped would happen, but it didn't. Machine Wars flopped. Beast Wars did okay. Machine Wars did less okay. And they had to relaunch it all over again in 2001 with Robots in Disguise, which is where Transformers really took off. So, yes, I would argue, yes, it is true, Generation 2 almost killed Transformers entirely as a brand, but I will never argue it was Beast Wars that saved the brand. Because, and this will be a whole video, but just real quick, because a lot of kids who bought Beast Wars only bought Beast Wars. They never bought Car Robots. They never bought Armada. They didn't watch the Michael Bay movies. They've never owned an Optimus Prime. Their only Megatron is a T-Rex. Those kids left the market. They're not Transformers fans today. They did not translate to Transformers fans. They were Beast Wars fans. Those same kids didn't even buy Beast machines. Now, the core Transformer fan base, collector base, who went from G1 to G2 to Beast Wars, etc., did buy Beast Wars, some of them. They were split. There was a divide. There were a good chunk of G1/G2 fans who never owned a Beast Wars toy in their life. So no, Beast Wars did not save Transformers. At best, Beast Wars was the life support system that kept it from going into a coma until Car Robots/Robots in Disguise actually saved it. And Car Robots in Disguise, even though it's called Robots in Disguise, has more in common as a toy line with Generation 2 than any toy line that's come since. Because RID was legit a hodgepodge of repaints/reissues and new toys. However, unlike G2, it had a new cartoon. to help sell the toys to kids. Collectors were going to buy it anyways. They always are. But there's just not enough collectors to drive the market, which is why Hasbro's going out of business, because there's not enough collectors to drive the market, and kids are exiting that market for Fortnite DLC. So what are you going to do? I don't know. This was a long video. I didn't get to my personal recollections of Generation 2, nor the toys themselves. So that'll be a part 2 I'll have to do down the road. But it's going to be a good ways down the road. Stay cool.